It's time for the Alien Conspiracy Podcast. We are your hosts, Agent ETA,
Agent Ether,
and Agent Anderson. Come along as we examine UFO sightings, conspiracies, and all things strange. You can follow the show on Twitter at AlienConPod. We also have an email address, alienconpod@protonmail.com. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget to check us out on Facebook and Discord. Links in the description. This week's episode, Bitcoin. What is it? How does it work? Why do people hate it? Why do people love it? Is it a conspiracy to bring down the global world's government or
banks?
Magic internet money?
I think it's to bring down the world's banks.
Well, who knows? Maybe it was created by the banks.
I read it's like a government Cold War. That's one of the conspiracies.
Yeah.
Is that China created it, and then we started buying it in America, and it's created like this Cold War between countries.
I don't know, but I don't understand it, so therefore it scares me.
Poke it with a stick.
Yeah, I have been kind of worried about that though. Like, what if like Bitcoin or cryptocurrency was created by the centralized world banks? Because those motherfuckers are never up to any good as far as for the common man. You're never going to benefit off of what they're doing.
It is out there. That idea is out there.
But I think it's pretty much the exact opposite of what they would want to achieve. So I find it very unlikely it was created by them. But let's get into it. We're talking about Bitcoin, a digital currency, magic internet money, BTC, blow stamps, Bitcoin-a-roni, Bitcoin-insky, the old dirty bits.
I haven't heard of half of these.
Some of those were real. I might have made up one or two of those.
I was going to say, they sound made up. Good job.
My favorite one there is the old dirty bits. I hadn't heard that. I like that. That's hilarious.
Yeah, I made that one up.
Very clever.
Yeah. Nice, dude.
Most people don't know what it actually is or how it works or why it's valuable. That's if anybody, I've been following cryptocurrency for quite some time. And pretty much the first thing anybody will, if it comes up in a conversation, the first thing anybody will ask is, well, why is it worth anything? It's just, it's just magic internet money. It should be worth nothing, right? It's not backed by anything. It's not backed by a central government. You can't trade it in for gold. It should be absolutely worthless, right? So why is it valuable? That's what a lot of people have trouble wrapping their head around. If it can be replicated endlessly, why isn't it, right? But not so fast, because that's not how Bitcoin works. It's a decentralized peer-to-peer digital currency that is deflationary by design. Now, what does that mean?
I don't know.
Well, I think Agent Ether is going to pick up the conversation here.
Sure. A lot of people, you're right. They say, isn't Bitcoin worthless? I know when I'm having conversations, because that's a topic that comes up a lot when I'm out with my girlfriends, not. But when people do talk about it with me, they think it's that it's worthless. But if you think about it, right now, people around the world, everyone from, really small investors to big businesses, they own about $1 trillion in Bitcoins. That's how much exists. Well, that was in November before the price went down so much. But still, we're talking about an awful lot of money.
I was going to say, that's a lot of nuts.
Well, I read that Bitcoin makes up about 3% of circulating, like the total amount of money in the world.
Well, let's compare the digital currency of Bitcoin to actual money that you're used to carrying around in your wallet. So how many dollars actually exist?
Well, if you're looking at, dollars in circulation, we're talking anywhere from 90 trillion to 1.3 quadrillion, but that isn't actual paper money. If you look at paper money, you only have 2.1 trillion that's out there.
Right. So the vast majority of money is imaginary. It's not printed. It doesn't actually exist physically. It
sits on balance sheets or debts, including our national debt that we owe to China. That's not real dollars. Or I think in the form of like unsold stock, you could say that's also imaginary money.
Yeah. And we talked about this on a previous episode when ETA did it. ETA and I did an episode about the creation of the Federal Reserve. We touched on a little bit on fractional reserve banking. Without going into too much detail, if you deposit $1 into a bank, that turns into approximately $10 that they can lend out. And that's more or less what the United States sets it at. Other countries or other banks, international, may have different standards. So I don't know what those would be. I'd have to look into it. But basically, that creates money out of thin air. They lend that out to that $1, they lend that out to like 10 different people.
Yeah, in other words, it can be created just by like a wave of the pen, or I guess in this day and age, a click of the keyboard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is why a lot of people don't like the idea of stimulus checks, is because our government creates this budget and then they spend more than they have, and they're sending out these stimulus checks, and it's like, where's this money coming from? It doesn't even exist. And so it's inflating the dollar. Dollars are inflationary. There will always be more tomorrow than there are today.
Right, exactly.
All right, so then we have to ask, what makes Bitcoin different than the dollar? I mean, we can say it has value because people agree that it does. I mean, it's not going away. At this point, Bitcoin has been around for a while, and even though it's really volatile, it goes up and it goes down, I don't think it's going anywhere.
I would agree with that.
That's what people wonder, is why does it have value? But what they don't realize is that the dollar is not backed by anything. It's only valuable because people say, we all agree that it's valuable.
Right. It's not like it's backed by gold.
So if I go to my next door neighbor and I say, I'll give you this many dollars for your car, they're willing to say, okay, I agree this car is worth that many dollars. I'll sell it to you. But it's not backed by gold. It's not backed by anything. And even gold, by extension, gold is only worth something because we say that it is. There's no reason why gold, I mean, you might as well pick up a rock off the ground and say, here's this rock, I'll trade it for your car. It's like a social construct.
Well, but here's the thing though, is like it's shiny.
Gold or Bitcoin or both?
It can be. Yeah, no, gold or silver. Sometimes it could be shiny. I like shiny.
I like shiny
Well,
stuff.
ironically enough, you mine gold and you also mine Bitcoin.
You do mine Bitcoin. That is true.
Nice.
But yeah, so that's the reason why, in a nutshell, the reason why Bitcoin is valuable, same reason dollars are valuable or gold or anything else, is because enough people agree that it's valuable and they're willing to trade it for other crap. So therefore it's worth something. But everything that has value is basically sort of like a cultural construct. It has value because we say it does.
Yeah, but Bitcoin actually exists. It's sitting somewhere either on an exchange or in a digital wallet, and there's a finite amount.
Yeah, and that's where I think a lot of people have trouble wrapping their heads around it, because it doesn't have any sort of physical representation. You can't print it. You can't pull it out of your wallet. It's purely digital. And yet it's more real than dollars, because every Bitcoin actually exists. They're not made up out of thin air. So they're more real than dollars. It's kind of crazy to think about, but it's true.
Yeah, I think the trouble is that people have is that they're virtual. They're virtual dollars, but you're holding them.
But so are dollars. Dollars are almost all virtual. Like most of them are virtual too.
And you're holding them in a wallet. It's just a digital personal wallet. And unlike money, even if you're hiding money in like an offshore account or under your bed, people can take that from you. No one can take Bitcoin from you. No one can seize it, freeze it. No government can force you to hand it over, short of, torture. And because, nobody can force you to hand it over, I think governments don't like it. And a lot of times, like the media, I think on behest of governments, will point to illicit activities. And they'll say, we can't allow Bitcoin because people use it for drug deals, for slave trade, for that sort of thing.
I remember hearing this argument that, the Bitcoin was an evil type of currency because, the drug trade is using it to build submarines to smuggle drugs. And I was like, all right then. I mean, what's your point? Like they're going to use whatever currency that they have at hand to
they're
do
gonna
that.
use dollars,
they're still going to do it.
They're going to
Yeah.
use Bitcoins.
Well, and yeah, there's nothing but negative press that you see in the mainstream media because the banks hate it and governments hate it because they can't control it. It's
But
like,
do the banks
Exactly.
really hate it? Because
Yeah, they do.
But everybody's buying Bitcoin, right?
well, nowadays they still,
because they don't want to lose out.
Yeah,
on
it's all
profit.
about money, I guess. They'll buy it because they want the money.
they don't like it, but they have no choice at this point. You know what it really reminds me of is back in the day when MP3s first came out in the record industry. The reaction of the record industry was basically like somebody sticking their fingers in their ears and saying, la, 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 I can't hear you. You don't exist, kind of a thing. But eventually they were forced to deal with the fact that, okay, this is a thing. And that's where we are in Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies is like when they first came out, the institutions, the banks, they stuck their fingers in their ears and they say, la, 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 you don't exist. I'm going to pretend you're not here. And eventually
fake news, right?
they were forced to acknowledge that, okay, this is a real thing. Maybe we need to start getting into this because what the hell, we're going to make money too, It's actually, Bitcoins are sort of like the opposite of dollars. Like Ether was saying, there's a finite amount. They're deflationary by design, and you can't make them up out of thin air.
You also can't reverse your transactions like you can with banks.
Yeah.
They're permanent. A scammer or a hacker can get on to your Bitcoins if they're like on an exchange. But if you have your personal wallet and it's not sitting out there in some shady exchange where you're kind of SOL, it's protected. When you use PayPal, 6 months later, someone can come onto the site and say that they don't like your product, they want to return it, and they will just take that money from your bank account. Like they always side with the buyer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Like if you sold something on eBay or whatever. And
right.
And it's not just eBay, it's many types of transactions go through, like, let's say PayPal or credit cards, and somebody can complain about that transaction and they're very easy to reverse.
You really don't have complete control of your bank account. Like people,
Right.
you think
No,
you own your
no.
bank account. The government can garnish your wages. They can garnish your bank account. The IRS can come in. If you owe taxes, they can seize that money. It's not really yours.
Yeah. And there's nothing you can do about it if they want to do that,
They can seize your money and take it with just an accusation of wrongdoing without even having been proven in the court of law of breaking the law. They can just, freeze your accounts and take your money just because they have that much power. And it has happened in some cases. It doesn't happen that often, but it does happen.
We could do an episode just on the shenanigans that have surrounded PayPal itself.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like there's some sob stories I've heard about people losing substantial amounts because, they said or did the wrong thing, for example, and or they left their account, for a long time and didn't mess with it. So like basically they just got cleared out,
Yeah.
But
Or how about that guy?
There's a lot of shenanigans involved.
How about that guy who's still searching in the junkyard for his old computer that he threw away that just has a ridiculous amount of money on it?
That's
a sad
that's one of the
story.
things I was talking about.
He's
yeah,
actually
or I'm
working
going
with
to talk
this.
about.
He's working with this group, and they think if you could remember some of your passwords, because there's
Hold that thought for just a minute, because I think ETA is going to touch on that later.
well, then I will hold my thoughts on that.
Let's not get into that just yet.
My
but-
apologies. I did not mean to steal your thunder. I was just thinking about it.
Well, it's a good story, It's a sad story, But
Yeah.
it's. I remember when Agent Anderson first told me that we were doing this episode. That was like one of the first, because I was like one of the. I remember hearing that story very early on. Yeah, it was a while ago now, but like
Yeah.
I remember hearing it. And I was like, "What? That sucks so
Yeah.
much for that dude."
Yeah.
Don't you just feel for
But
him?
yeah, we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I guess I'll go
man,
into
yeah.
what do you think, the history?
There's one more advantage that Bitcoin has that I think is worth mentioning in general. Now, there's a lot of stuff. I'm assuming the audience in general is unfamiliar, so that's why we're taking it at like a very basic level. So there's a lot more to it than what we're just saying. But one of the best things about Bitcoin is that you can transfer money anywhere in the world, and it's very fast and very cheap to do so. The speed and cost of moving $1 is the exact same as moving $1 million or any amount of money. 10 cents, 10 million, whatever. It costs the same. It takes the same amount of time. It takes 10 minutes to send any amount of money anywhere in the world. And the cost to move it is very low, usually pennies or dimes. It depends on how much network activity there is at the time. The price fluctuates. The price itself, you can set whatever price you want. If you want to set zero, you can do that as a transaction fee, but it might take a really long time for that transaction to go through. A reasonable transaction fee is generally 50 cents or lower. And if you're going to send like $1 million, overseas somewhere, it's going to cost you a lot more than 50 cents, and it's going to take a lot more than 10 minutes, right? So,
well, especially if you're transferring one currency into another.
Oh, right. I hadn't even thought about that.
Potentially, you could lose all kinds of money.
Yeah. Everybody's going to want a piece of that pie, right? You can't just send $5 million overseas or wherever without somebody taking a cut.
I want a cut.
But with Bitcoin, your cut is going to be the same for 5 million as it will be for 5 cents. There's absolutely no difference. It's just whatever the network fees are. The higher your fees that you choose to pay, the more likely it is that one of the miners is going to want to process that transaction. So it's going to be faster than people who are offering lower fees. But even with a very low fee, it'll go through eventually. But if you, most wallets nowadays, well, we're getting ahead of ourselves there, but the software will tell you what fee to pay usually, and it's usually very, very low. But so let's get a little bit into the history of cryptocurrencies, or Bitcoin specifically.
Okay. Do you have 100% trust in your government and banks? Do you believe they have your best economic interest in mind? Sure they do.
Of course they do.
So I would say, why do we need digital currency? And I would say, why don't we? The government doesn't like it. It can't control it. It has trouble even getting people to pay their taxes on, Bitcoin transactions. So I feel very strongly that we should use Bitcoin. I like it.
Well, I would just like to say that, first of all, the government can track Bitcoin. We'll get into that in a little bit, but also don't dodge your taxes.
Don't dodge the taxes. It's a bad idea.
You know what? Like, people hate paying taxes. I get it. But on the other hand, all those people who are willing to risk their lives to put your house, when your house is on fire, they're going to put it out. They'll run into a burning building to pull you out of it. That's taxes. The reason why we have roads that you can actually drive on, taxes. Schools, taxes.
Yeah, I'm not saying people shouldn't pay their taxes. I'm saying they're not.
I like paying my taxes. This may sound weird to people. I like paying my taxes because you get something for it. You really do. But anyways.
So the idea of Bitcoin, or digital currency in general, has actually been around a while, specifically something that's going to be encrypted and digital. So an example of this is the formulation of BitGold, which was proposed back in 1998. It was never implemented. There was this mathematician. He published a paper, and his name was Nicholas.
Nick Szabo.
I cannot pronounce his name. I have it phonetically written here, and I'm still struggling. Anyways, he described in this paper using a computer to solve a puzzle. And when you solve the puzzle, that's called proof of work. And the cool thing about it is it doesn't require a third party.
That's the key right there. That's the real linchpin. The really revolutionary idea is that you don't need a third party. With most transactions that are digital, let's say a credit card or transferring from here to there or whatever, it always requires a trusted third party to facilitate that. But we're talking about something that's peer-to-peer, decentralized, without any centralized party mediating the network. It's really crazy that they were able to achieve this.
Right, but there is a problem.
What's the problem?
The double spend.
Oh no, not the double spend. What's the double spend?
Well, it's kind of like counterfeiting.
Yeah, that's true. But a double spend is, so BitGold was a paper. It was a theoretical framework that was basically published by Nick Szabo. And it had the foundation, the framework for a decentralized digital currency. There were other digital currencies before BitGold and Bitcoin that used a centralized agency to verify transactions. We won't go into those. But one of the main problems with BitGold is it didn't prevent the double spend. The double spend is when you come up with some way of either doing two transactions simultaneously, or you're somehow able to spend the same coin twice. You're basically able to fool the network, and you basically counterfeit one way or another. You counterfeit the digital currency, because it's like anything digital. It can just be copy and pasted. One of the parts that Agent Ether really skipped, which I think is important here. You don't want to you don't want to read this. You just want to flip me off.
That's all I have.
Okay. Well, anyways, I'll go ahead and read it then. One question that some people may wonder is, well, if there's all these software problems and double spends, why would anybody want a digital currency in the first place? What's the point? I already have money. I already have money in the bank. I can spend it even without physical cash. I can just use my bank card or whatever. No problem. Easy peasy, right? No big deal. But why would you want to create this digital currency? Well, we know why Nick Szabo wanted to, because he told us on his blog. A long time ago, I hit upon the idea of BitGold. The problem in a nutshell is that our money currently depends on trust in a third party for its value. As many inflationary and hyperinflationary episodes during the 20th century demonstrated, this is not an ideal state of affairs. Similarly, private banknote issue, while it had various advantages as well as disadvantages, similarly depended on a trusted third party. Precious metals and collectibles have an unforgeable scarcity due to the costliness of their creation. This once provided money in the value of which it was largely independent of any trusted third party. Precious metals have problems, however. It's too costly to assay metals repeatedly for common transactions. Thus, a trusted third party, usually associated with the tax collector who accepted the coins as payment, was invoked to stamp a standard amount of the metal into a coin. Transporting large values of metal can be a rather insecure affair, as the British found when transporting gold across a U-boat-infested Atlantic to Canada during World War I to support their gold standard. What's worse, you can't pay online with metal. Thus, it would be very nice if there were a protocol whereby unforgeably costly bits could be created online with minimal dependence on trusted third parties, and then securely stored, transferred, and assayed with similar minimal trust. BitGold. In summary, all money mankind has ever used has been insecure in one way or another. This insecurity has been manifested in a wide variety of ways, from counterfeiting to theft, but the most pernicious of which has probably been inflation. BitGold may provide us with a money of unprecedented security from these dangers. That's just sort of why he wanted to create a digital currency, because you might think to yourself, like I said, what's wrong with the currency we have? Why do we need a digital currency? And right there, he kind of lays out his thoughts, and that's a very brief summary. If you want, you can look up, he has a blog, and you can look up a lot about this guy and his writings and what he thinks, but that's just a very, very, very short version of, what he thinks. So I don't know if Ether mentioned the date, but BitGold's paper was published in 1998. Did you say that?
I did.
I don't think you said that.
I did say that. I just didn't read the very long-winded statement that you
All right.
did.
Well, I have it recorded, so
You double check.
Yes.
I'm going to go back and double check. Digital currencies are basically data. Data can be copied and pasted. Therefore, it's possible for a digital token to be spent twice or counterfeited. The traditional solution to this problem is a central authority that verifies transactions and rejects anything like a double spend. But this is obviously unacceptable for a decentralized currency, and that was the whole goal with BitGold and later Bitcoin. This itself, with the central authority, isn't foolproof at all. Currency regulated by a central authority is counterfeited all the time. A digital currency regulated by a central power will be inflationary. It's a law of nature, there's no way around it. If you could just print more money anytime you want, then you will do so. And that's what happens. And that's where Bitcoin comes in. It solved the double spend problem, the inflation problem, and some other stuff. It's more or less impossible to counterfeit Bitcoin or create it out of thin air, wave a magic wand, and create massive inflation. So magic internet money may not be looking so bad now compared to regular money, right? So I don't know if that makes sense, but I mean, that's kind of why like Bitcoin has, I guess, more intrinsic value than like a dollar, which has, the backing and faith of the government, but they can just make as much as they want, where Bitcoin is limited to a finite amount. So
yeah, there's a set amount, right? Isn't it like something like 18 million or something like that, or
21 million total, but I'll get to that in a minute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But so why is inflation bad? So despite every economist with a fancy degree, they'll say that inflation is good, but it depends on who you are. If you're a business, you want people to spend money. If you have inflation, then the value of money goes down over time. So people are encouraged to spend it, not save it. That's great if you're like Walmart. You don't want people, sitting on their money. You want them spending it at your store. If money's deflationary, then people are encouraged to save it, not spend it. That's very bad if you're Walmart or a business. Hey, nothing against Walmart, I love going there in my sweats. It's a good time. But anyways, economists will tell you that deflation is the bugbear of economics, the monster hiding under your bed. But as an individual or household trying to save money, inflation is a very bad thing. Your saved money drops in value over time, and your only option is to put it into some sort of risky investment like the stock market. It sounds good because the stock market always goes up no matter what, right? But in reality, I mean, maybe in the long term, but in reality, what if it happens to drop by half? What if the market crashes when you want to retire? Well, guess what? You're going to have to work a few more years. It doesn't matter. If you want to retire now, you're at the whims of the timing of the stock market. You have no control over that. If you're lucky, the timing works out, but for many people, it doesn't. What if you could put your money into something that was designed to go up in value over time? Something that would be safer than gold, that would be very hard to steal, something totally liquid that you could cash in anytime you wanted. Well, that's kind of the idea, is why it was designed to be deflationary rather than inflationary. And that's why, inflation is so bad for the average person, is because no matter how much money you put in the bank, it's going to go down over time. And I don't care what percentage you're earning on your bank account, it's not keeping up with inflation. So what is Bitcoin and how does it work? And when was it invented and who invented it? So on October 31st, 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto published a paper titled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. It described Bitcoin as a system for electronic transaction without relying on trust. On the 3rd of January, 2009, Satoshi mined the Genesis block number 0, and created the first 50 Bitcoins. Before he vanished, he mined an estimated 1 million Bitcoins, give or take. We're not entirely sure.
Wow.
But it's somewhere in the ballpark of 1 million Bitcoins. And earlier today, I checked the value is somewhere in the ballpark of $40,000 each. So you go ahead and do the math on that one. It's pretty easy to calculate. It's a fuck ton of money.
Yes, a lot.
That he's got just sitting there. You can find his public addresses, and you can see to this day how much coins are still sitting there. They haven't moved, to my knowledge. They're still there. But anyways, the first time somebody bought something with Bitcoin was on May 22nd, 2010, when somebody bought 2 pizzas for, anybody guess how many Bitcoins?
Wait. I don't know the story, but let me guess. 4?
I'm going to guess 100.
10,000 Bitcoins.
Holy shit.
That's one expensive pizza.
At this time, it was still very experimental, and they weren't really worth anything. And if you could have literally any computer, the worst computer on the planet, you could use to mine Bitcoins, and you could make some. Nowadays, there's so much computing power on the network that you have to have really powerful computing in order to make money on it. But back then, you just your average Joe Blow, laptop, you could make some Bitcoins on it. They were virtually worthless at the time. So on the forums, somebody said, hey, I'll pay somebody 10,000 Bitcoins to order me a pizza or 2 pizzas. And they did. That was the first transaction. So nowadays, those Bitcoins are worth about $400 million. Some expensive
that
pizza.
Shit cray.
Oh,
Yeah.
man.
But for $400 million, this individual went down as the first person ever to spend Bitcoins for something.
Yeah, what was his name?
I don't know.
See, I don't know either.
I'd have to look it up, you know?
Man, 400 million. Don't you just wish? That's like more than the lottery.
But
Holy crap. Yeah.
there is sort of an unofficial holiday on May 22nd to commemorate the first transaction. It's like a pizza day, Bitcoin pizza day or something. So
I like
now
it.
I feel embarrassed. I was like, 4?
well, yeah, I mean, that's understandable.
I was going off of like, what they're worth, are worth today. I guess you'd say, like something like 4 would be absolutely astronomical, ridiculous as far as how much it's worth today,
Yeah. Well, back then they weren't really traded on exchanges.
10,000.
Back then it was almost like a barter. There was no really established value. So it was, I mean, everybody had tens of thousands of them. So it was just like, you want me to spend $40 on pizza? Like you're going to have to give me something for it, I guess. So 10,000 seems reasonable,
Well, and also, especially earlier, not that it isn't still a little bit, but like especially very early on in the history of Bitcoin, from what I understand, it was extremely volatile. Like there were big swings as far as the worth, right?
Always was, always has been, still is.
Yeah.
Still is. It was just recently hit a high of like 60 or 70, and now it's back. It went down to like the low 30s, and now it's at like 40. I don't follow it on a daily basis, so I don't know exactly, but I mean, it swings all over the place. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
On August 10th, 2010, a vulnerability was found and a transaction of half a Bitcoin was used to send 92 billion Bitcoins. However, this was obviously spotted by the people running the network. The bug allowing it was fixed, and miners forked the blockchain, canceling the transaction. This is the only exploit to have ever happened on the network, and it was quickly fixed. If another vulnerability was found, it wouldn't really matter all that much because the problem would be fixed and the hacker would end up with nothing because the people running the network, which is anybody who wants to participate they would just roll it back until, just before the problem happened and everything would be fine. Probably there'd be a momentary price dip or whatever, but in the long run or even in the short run, it'd be okay. It wouldn't matter that much. But this is a good example of why trying to hack the network itself really isn't all that, there's not really much point to it. That's why the crooks, instead of trying to compromise the network, they go after individuals and they try to scam people, or they try to have, like a software attack or like a virus or something, instead attacking individuals because you're not going to really benefit from attacking the network itself. On February 24th, 2014, the largest crypto exchange in the world, Mt. Gox, went down, crashing the price of Bitcoin. Many thought that the party was over and, crypto was dead, and that was pretty much the end. I actually want to do an episode on Mt. Gox because there's really quite a lot to it, and it's there's too much there to really go over as part of a different episode. It really needs its own episode. Late 2016 and 2017, institutional investors, or, Wall Street, started getting into Bitcoin. So it took them that long to sort of wake up to the idea that they could make money on this. And they started jumping in. Before this happened, if you had like $50,000 or $100,000, you were considered like a whale, right? Like one of the big boys, one of the big giant people like one of the big investors. You were rich. But after 2016, late 2016 and 2017, when the institutional investors get in, now all of a sudden, 50,000 or 100,000, that is now peanuts. Now we're talking about millions and billions of dollars pouring into the crypto markets. And Bitcoin went from, maybe $1,000, shot all the way up to $20,000, and then crashed all the way back down to $3,000 and has gone up since to where we are today. In a nutshell. But this is pretty significant because this is sort of like the growth of it. It was inevitable that sooner or later Wall Street or big investors would get involved. So you could say at this point, Bitcoin had graduated from kindergarten or joined the big leagues or whatever you want to say. But that was sort of like the end of the beginning. And now we're sort of in the next phase, which is, going from something that's a novelty or magic internet money or something that people sort of have heard about. And now it's reaching the point where it's becoming like a household name, and people who thought it was magic internet money before are now starting to buy some. It's becoming a very common thing for people to want to get some, or for people hearing about it. It's showing up in the news all the time and that kind of thing.
And it's getting a lot easier to get Bitcoin. You can, buy it off PayPal, and I think you can buy it off Coinstar. Like if you're in the supermarket.
Yeah, if you want to get ripped off.
I'm not saying it's not a ripoff. I'm just saying it's so much easier to get Bitcoin now than it used to be.
It's easier, but
you can actually spend it on stuff too. Like before, like there was very little you can actually spend Bitcoin on, right? But you had to trade it, like what Angie Anderson was talking about earlier. Like it was kind of a bartering system very earlier on, but now you could actually put a damn down payment on a house, right?
I guess to sum up that Wall Street stuff, I mean, we could do a whole episode on the Wall Street stuff. For example, when they started doing Bitcoin futures, which I don't want to get into what futures are because it's a whole other thing, but you're basically gambling on what the price is going to be in the future. When that started happening, the Bitcoin price so you buy a contract of a future, you say, okay, I'm paying this amount of money. I'm gambling that the price of Bitcoin is going to reach this price by this date. Every single time that date came, Bitcoin always fell short of that price. It would run up to that price, and then just before then, the price would drop. So there's a ton of stuff like that definitely looks like the price is being manipulated by Wall Street.
It's
Wall Street.
super sus.
Yeah, super sus. But we won't go into that. It's like a whole episode by itself, so we won't go into that here. But I mean, so that's I'm just doing a very, very brief version of the history, just to kind of, ground everybody and just to go through a couple of the major events. But there's a ton of stuff that I'm skipping over. That's just sort of like a very brief history because, we don't have, a 4-hour episode for us here.
You could have a whole podcast just on Bitcoin.
Oh yeah, there are entire podcasts just on Bitcoin. Yeah, for sure. But anyways, let's get into just a little bit about how Bitcoin works. Now you can get really technical as far as how it actually works, but I'm going to go on I'm going to keep it really basic. Bitcoin exists on a public ledger. Every transaction is recorded on that ledger. The transactions are verified by the decentralized network. Anybody with computing power can participate in the network and help maintain the ledger and verify transactions. Every Bitcoin created and every transaction ever transacted are recorded on the public ledger. Contrary to what most people believe, it isn't anonymous. The transactions themselves don't have any identifying information, but it is possible to find somebody by linking them to a particular transaction. The government has developed software to track and identify people based on their usage of the Bitcoin network to find people who are doing things like, buying drugs or laundering money and stuff like that.
Or building submarines.
Yeah, building submarines, yeah. But this is why, contrary to popular belief, Bitcoin is not that great for crime. It's not anonymous at all. And cold hard cash, I think, is way better for crime because it's impossible to track its history, where it came from or where it went. By comparison, those hookers and coke that you bought with Bitcoin back in 2017, that stuff, the record of that transaction never goes away. It will always be available on the public ledger. It's there permanently.
They might be able to use a drug dog to figure out maybe if that bill has been used to snort some coke or something, but that's about it.
Yeah, but I mean, that's not proof. You could have just gotten that at the grocery store or the bank or something,
So if I want to go check out this public ledger, where am I going to go?
There's a lot of places where you can find various versions of the public ledger. If you want to find the raw source code kind of a deal where you look at, the nitty gritty details, you can find that. If you want to find a web version, like a front end that will interpret the data and put it in a way that's easy to read and digest, you can find that too. There are many, many places. Just Google it. Just put, Google Bitcoin public ledger. It's very available. It's easy to find. Anyways, sooner or later, a person can be connected to a transaction. And the way they will do that most commonly, or the easiest way, would be if you transfer your Bitcoin to exchange it for dollars somewhere, you're going to have to do that on an exchange. And when you do that, the exchange is going to want your identity. It wasn't always like this. There used to be exchanges where you could be anonymous and transact stuff. But nowadays, they're pretty much always going to ask for your driver's license and stuff like that. And so it's a lot harder to get away with nowadays. But sooner or later, your identity will be tied to your Bitcoin transactions, and then the government will find out about that. So, I mean, for crime, Bitcoin, I don't think is really the way to go, at least not as far as I can tell. Maybe there's something I don't know. But even stuff like Bitcoin mixers, which we won't get into, even those can be decoded by the government. Nothing is foolproof. You are not safe using Bitcoin for crime. You will be caught if they want to catch you. But anyways, how is Bitcoin stored, right? That's the next question most people usually have is, where do you keep it? It exists where? In the ether? It exists, in space?
I don't have any Bitcoins, no.
Well, you store your Bitcoin on it. Usually people will buy it on some kind of exchange. Sort of like if you go to like a stock exchange, you can like TD Ameritrade or I don't know, Scottrade. I think that one went out of business, whatever. But you buy your stocks on an exchange and the broker will hold those stocks for you. You can ask for a certificate. You can have them mail you the stock or whatever, but most people don't do that. Most people will have their shares stored for them by the exchange. Now, Bitcoin, you can also store on the exchange, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. You can also store it on a personal wallet. The way the wallet works is that it's basically software that holds your coins on a public address. The address is a long string of numbers and letters up to 35 characters long that is a unique identifier. It also has a private key. So there's two parts of the address, or there's two parts of your Bitcoin storage. There's the public facing part and the private facing part, the public key and the private key, right? The private key is sort of like a password, which prevents anyone from accessing the Bitcoin stored on the public address. The public facing one is kind of like a digital location, and that's where you send them to. That's where they're stored. That's where they're assigned. You have, a random string of characters, and the network says, okay, this random string of characters has this number of Bitcoins on it. Think of it sort of like a unique gamer tag or email address, but its only purpose is to assign Bitcoins rather than communication or playing games, right? You need a password to log into the email or gaming account. That's the private key. The public key or the public facing key would be the email address or the gamer tag, which anybody can find if they want to, right?
I truly appreciate a good gamer tag. Matter of fact, Agent Anderson has a pretty damn decent one himself.
I got a couple of good ones, yeah.
Yeah.
But all right, so
I was waiting for you to say it, but then you didn't.
No, I'm not.
I can understand.
Hey, we don't want that out there. I just want to play my games in peace, man.
I gotta say, they're so good. I'm embarrassed that the children use them.
So I didn't tell them to. Sometimes the kids will use my account to play games, and I'm like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have used that name.
Well, the worst thing is when I have to tell other moms what the username is so that their kids can play with my kids.
Yeah,
and I have to apologize. To be like, I'm really sorry. This is the game
fault.
name.
I apologize.
I tell them not to use my account, but what are you going to do, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so anyways, in a nutshell, you have a random string of numbers that you have the ownership of, just like an email account. And then if somebody sends you Bitcoins to that address, we call that an address, the random strings, right? So if somebody sends Bitcoins to that address, the network identifies that address as having this number of Bitcoins assigned to it. And just like an email address, you can't access those without the password. That's pretty much it, right? It's pretty simple, just like how email works or anything else really. So how do you send Bitcoins from point A to point B? Well, every 10 minutes, transactions are calculated by the network. This is called a block. The block includes each and every transaction during the 10 minutes, everywhere across the entire globe. The computing power needed by the network to complete the transactions is rewarded every block with newly minted Bitcoins. The number of Bitcoins began at 50 per block, but every 4 years or so, it's cut in half. This is called block halving, and this is why Bitcoin is deflationary by design. The next halving work will occur sometime around May 5th, 2024. The current reward is 6.25 Bitcoins, and will be decreased to 3.125 Bitcoins in the next block halving in 2024. So that means that right now, every 10 minutes, 6.25 Bitcoins are created. That's with every block. So every 10 minutes, 6 more Bitcoins. And that's a reward that's given to the people who provide the computing power. There will eventually be a total of 21 million total Bitcoins produced. Block rewards will be reduced to 0 sometime in 2140, but the actual rewards will become essentially 0 well before that because it gets cut in half, cut in half, cut in half. By 2140, it'll be 0, but well before then, the rewards will be essentially 0.
So this is something I actually have struggled with myself. Why, when every country, let's say, I think recently it was Russia, so they didn't want people Bitcoin mining anymore, the price of Bitcoin then drops since it's deflationary by nature, and eventually there's not going to be mining because it's not going to be worth anything. Why does it matter if some countries start cracking down on Bitcoin mining?
Well, that's the thing. So there's two parts of it, right? So there's the block reward, but there's also the transaction fees. The Bitcoin miners get both. So the idea is that as it becomes, it's deflationary by design, as it becomes more valuable, the reward, the block reward will no longer be necessary. The reward of the transaction fees will be enough for people to want to provide computing power to the network.
So they'll continue.
Yeah. So remember I was talking earlier about how it costs something to send Bitcoin. It's like a few cents or whatever, right? Eventually, the idea is that it will become more widely adopted. It'll be sort of like a universal currency, maybe a world reserve currency. And at that point, if everybody in the world is using it, a few cents here and there every 10 minutes will really add up to a lot. It'll add up to enough to where people will still provide computing power to the network. There will still be a reward. That won't go away. It's just the number of Bitcoins created every 10 minutes will decline over time.
You just blew my mind.
Blew your tiny little mind.
Amazing.
But yeah.
My fragile little mind.
Yeah, this is what I mean when I say it seems more complicated than it is. When you really begin to understand how simple it is, I'm not talking about the math and the computer code behind it. I'm just talking about the concepts. That the number of Bitcoins created every 10 minutes is cut in half every 4 years. That's it. It's not that complicated that it's simpler than it seems at a first glance. The first time I saw it too, I'm like, I don't understand. It can't really be that simple, but yeah, it really is that simple.
So the more people that buy Bitcoin, the more valuable a Bitcoin becomes.
Right. And that's the key idea is that if it becomes more widely used over time, that's the requirement it needs in order to be deflationary. If it becomes less used over time, then it will no longer be deflationary, obviously. But if it continues on its current trajectory, it will definitely be used more tomorrow than it is today. By tomorrow, I mean, it's the future in general, since age and ether tends to be very, very specific. But yeah, so that's the basic idea, right? If, 10 years from now, it's used as a universal storage of value, then it will be deflated by quite a lot from what it is today. In other words, it'll be in a higher demand and it'll be more valuable per Bitcoin. And if you look at the price history, that has happened. The way it was designed by a very smart person. We'll talk about that in a little bit, or team of people. They basically predicted what would happen if they unleashed this upon the world, and it's happened so far. Will it continue to happen? Nobody knows. There are many, many digital currencies now, so there's a lot of competition to Bitcoin. So maybe someday Bitcoin will be replaced by something else. We won't even get into all the other digital currencies that are out there, some of which are superior to Bitcoin in many ways, like smart contracts and things like that. But that's a whole other episode, so we won't get into that right now. But anyways, so there's a fun fact. A lot of people I've talked to, they get confused because they're like, okay, well, if Bitcoin is worth 40,000, I don't have 40,000 to spend on a Bitcoin, so I can't buy any. But fun fact, the smallest unit of Bitcoin is actually called a Satoshi, named after its creator, Satoshi Nakamoto. This is 1/100 millionth of a Bitcoin. If Bitcoin was worth $1 million each, then one Satoshi would be worth 1 penny. So they are highly divisible. You can buy 1 penny or even a fraction of a penny right now because they're not worth $1 million each. You can buy a fraction of a penny of a Bitcoin if you want to. So you don't need $40,000 or whatever to buy Bitcoin. You can do it with literally any amount of money.
Well, you know what I tell some of my girlfriends?
What's that?
I say, if you're going to buy that lotto ticket, maybe you should try buying a fraction of a Bitcoin instead, because probably going to get more return on the Bitcoin than you will on the lotto ticket.
Well, nothing is guaranteed.
No, but it's more fun.
You'll at least get some return.
Yeah. Well, that's true. Actually, if you buy a lotto ticket, chances are it's going to become zero. Whereas with Bitcoin or any investment, the chances of it becoming zero, not that big. It happens, but it's pretty rare for any investment to become worth zero. But all right, so that's, I mean, we could do many episodes just on the basics of Bitcoin, but there's usually a lot of confusion about what it is, how it works, why it's valuable, that kind of stuff. So I wanted to kind of go over that stuff a little bit. So now let's talk about some controversies. The first of which, probably the biggest controversy in the realm of cryptocurrency, is who is Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin? Turns out nobody knows. The name is a pseudonym. Nobody knows who created Bitcoin, which was the revolutionary, well, at least I think, is going to completely revolutionize currency. It's like going from the barter system to the fiat system. Like, it's the next step, and nobody knows who created this thing. Some people think that Satoshi is actually a team of people. There's some evidence for this. For example, if you look at the code, now this is obviously, I don't know anything about code, so I'm taking somebody else's word for this, but the code for Bitcoin that was developed by Satoshi would be very difficult for one person to do by themselves, according to what I read anyways. But I mean, think of it as like writing an entire set of encyclopedias, I guess. It'd be hard for one person to do. Usually that's done by multiple people, each writing their own article for whatever entry, right? I don't know if that's a good example, but it's what came to mind. But we have other clues as to who actually wrote the code. In the code, if you've ever seen computer code, there will be, different language used, different comments or whatever. In the code, certain words use a British spelling. For example, the word color is spelled COLOUR. That's kind of an interesting clue.
It's like the difference between like how we pronounce aluminum or how they pronounce aluminium.
Yeah. By the way, that's incorrect, guys. It's not aluminium. It's not spelled that way. Just look at how it's spelled. That's just totally wrong. Stop saying it. Come on, gosh. But so anyways, Satoshi Nakamoto posted for the last time on December 12th, 2010, and then disappeared into the ether. He didn't say why he went away. He just left. His last post was part of a discussion about technical stuff. He had no clue whatsoever that was going to be his last post. Some people speculate that he left because WikiLeaks began taking payments in Bitcoin after they got frozen out of bank accounts. Bitcoin was still in the very early stages at this point, and Satoshi didn't want to be associated with anything as controversial as WikiLeaks. The day before his last post, he posted on I'm talking about, I didn't say, I don't think, but we're talking about the bitcointalk.org forums, which has always been one of the major central hubs of, cryptocurrency discussions. So on this forums, you could still find this to this day, by the way. You can go look up his account and look up every post that he ever did on these forums. He said, "It would have been nice to get this attention in any other context. WikiLeaks has kicked the hornet's nest and the swarm is headed towards us." So he did not want to be involved with this nonsense at all. He was trying to
build... He didn't want to have anything to do with the attention.
Yeah, he was trying to build like a legitimate digital currency. He wanted nothing to do with the Silk Road or WikiLeaks or any of this stuff. He was just, it was, completely against what he was trying to accomplish. So there have been many people claiming to be Satoshi over the years. The vast majority of these are easily disproven. If it was a single individual, the best candidate, in my opinion, would be Nick Szabo, which, for those of you unfamiliar, if you want to Google this stuff or whatever, it's spelled SZABO, which is why Agent Ether was having trouble pronouncing it earlier.
In some countries, they don't say zebra, they say zebra.
Yeah, and those countries are weird, and we don't like them. What do they say? Zebra?
Zebra.
Yeah. Zebra. That's a nice zebra over there, whatever. Okay, so there are so many similarities between BitGold and Bitcoin. Nick had the knowledge, experience, and background to create something like Bitcoin. However, he's always denied it was him. But of course, the real creator would deny it. So it's one of those things, one of those classic, conspiracy things where it's like, aha, you're denying it was you, so it must be you, like that's one of the go-to conspiracy explanations. Like they said it wasn't them, so it must be them because only the real person would deny it. But anyways, in 2008, Sabo wrote a comment on his blog saying that he wanted to create a live version of BitGold, and this was, just before Bitcoin came out, or, maybe not just before, but, relatively speaking. Satoshi claimed to be a 37-year-old man living in Japan. However, this is doubted because if you look at his writings and, his posts on the forums and stuff like that, he's very fluent in English, and most foreign speakers don't have that good of a grasp on the language. They make grammatical errors and stuff like that. I mean, if you've ever been on forums where people are, posting in their non-native language, it's usually pretty obvious that it's not their native language. I guess you could say that he's a native English speaker living in Japan. You could interpret it that way. I don't know. But timestamps of his posts on bitcointalk.org show that he almost never posted between 2 p.m. and 8 p.m. in Japan time. That would be sort of unusual for him to be asleep at those times or to not be active. It's not impossible. It doesn't really prove anything, but it's just sort of an interesting little piece of information. So another candidate for Satoshi Nakamoto is Hal Finney. He was a cryptographic pioneer. There's not really a whole lot to support that he was the guy, but he was involved with cryptocurrencies and stuff from pretty much the get-go. So it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for him to be the guy. Another person suspected of being Satoshi is Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto, who lived a few blocks away from Hal Finney. His birth name is Satoshi Nakamoto. He was a physicist, and he had experience as a computer engineer working on classified projects for technology and financial information service companies. And he also became a libertarian in the 90s. So obviously, we don't talk about politics a lot on this show, but let's face it, Bitcoin is kind of like a libertarian kind of a thing,
Does he deny it too, though?
Yeah, of course. He says it's not him. But at some point, this guy is kind of interesting because at some point, a journalist caught up with him and decided that he was the guy and interviewed him. And in the interview, he said, "I am no longer involved in that, and I cannot discuss it. It's been turned over to other people. They are in charge of it now. I no longer have any connection." He later would retract this statement, saying he misunderstood the question, right? But if he didn't misunderstand the question, you're like, well, that's exactly what you would say, right? It's
Sounds
a very
like it, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very strange statement. So when the article about this guy was published, about Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto, when the journalist published the article about him saying that he was the Satoshi Nakamoto, there was a media frenzy and reporters were camping outside of his house. They were following him around in his car and basically harassing the crap out of him, as journalists do. Which what was that movie? There was a line in a movie which I find absolutely hilarious, but also the line was like, "I know you're a journalist, but you used to be a real person," or something like that.
You used to have a soul.
Yeah, you used to have a soul. Because it's what kind of person would harass somebody like this? Not somebody who's a person, somebody who's but anyways, when the article was published about him, and it led to this media frenzy, the day that article was published, Satoshi Nakamoto, the guy who invented Bitcoin, his peer-to-peer foundation account posted its first message in 5 years saying, "I am not Dorian Nakamoto," which is this is really kind of suspicious, right? But it was later claimed by the foundation that the account had been hacked. Now, this opens up all kinds of questions, right? Like, if he was being harassed, then he would go on to that account and say, hey, this isn't me. But on the other hand, only a moron would do it, because doing that would prove that that was you, right?
Yeah.
It's like from The Princess Bride.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that scene from The Princess Bride.
Inconceivable.
Yeah, what does it mean? And furthermore, it's hard for me to believe that a cryptography expert would have their account hacked. Their password is not going to be 12345. You're not going to hack their password, right? So it
sounds like he's being a slippery little snake.
Yeah. So this whole thing, like just that one statement from this account that hadn't been active for 5 years, opens up like a whole can of worms. That it's just like, what does it mean? It couldn't have been hacked. Maybe it was hacked. Maybe it was him, but it would be stupid if it was him. So maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it really was hacked. It's just, you can go round and round all day discussing it. Like it's crazy, but it's really fun also. But so there's a lot of other candidates that could have been Satoshi Nakamoto, and we could do, multiple episodes just on those guys. But let's leave that controversy where it is for now. And I guess, I want to let somebody else talk for a little bit. So let's let ETA do his part. And then after he's done with his, when you're done with your bit, we'll get into something a little more nefarious.
Yeah, well, because what I'm talking about isn't going to be so technically detailed, I can tell you that much. So one of the things that kind of really interests me about like cryptocurrency and like Bitcoin and stuff in particular is like how some people have misplaced their passwords or what have you, and also there's supposed to be, I remember I'm reading an article that said like around like 2019, there was something like 20% of Bitcoin that was actually like misplaced. And like because of people that had like a stranded wallet, or they had forgot their passwords or whatever,
It depends on how they calculate
I find
that.
Very.
Some places will calculate that.
Well, I've seen a couple. Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes what they'll do is they'll look at Bitcoin addresses, because like I said earlier, you can look at all of the Bitcoin in existence, and you can look at the public addresses where those Bitcoins are owned. And any address
inactive.
Yeah. Any address that's been inactive for like even as little as 1 year, some people will consider as lost, which is pretty ridiculous. But usually it's like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. What a lot of that probably is just people saving, really,
right,
and just not spending.
So it's not necessarily lost. It's a ballpark, but I doubt it's as high as 20%, but it could be.
It's still,
Well,
I think it's still significant dollar-wise.
Yeah.
It must be a decent amount, like if it were about like 20% or something, that'd be, over $100 billion easily. It probably would be closer probably nowadays to 200, but at least in the middle of there somewhere, But I have heard a couple stories of, and we had alluded to it earlier as well, of people that basically accidentally threw away their Bitcoins. And holy mother of God, if I had done some of these things, and some of them were honest mistakes, you know what I mean? Like they just didn't know what they were, like they didn't realize what they were doing, and like they weren't trying to get rid of it. They just happened to have mistaken it for something else, or somebody else like threw away their password or something like that. They weren't being necessarily totally responsible, and maybe they had written it down on a piece of paper or something. You know what I mean? The one story that Agent Ether had alluded to earlier was about an IT worker from he was a Welsh IT worker, and this guy lost 7,500 Bitcoins. Like, holy crap, dude.
7500.
That's a lot. I don't know if I don't think I did the Welsh accent right there. But anyways, yeah, fuck me. But anyways, so this guy's name was James Howells, I think. Was what, I don't know how to pronounce his name to be exact, to be quite honest, but anyways, the guy started mining Bitcoin somewhere around 2009, and from what the story goes, in the summer of 2013, he had basically like the computer that he was using to mine it was out of date and stuff, and he wanted to get something new, and so he kept the hard drive, but he got rid of the rest of the computer, and he had kept it in his office and such, and so long story short, basically what happened was the guy accidentally threw it away. Like he was cleaning out his office and he was basically just tidying stuff up, and he accidentally misidentified it. I think his quote was, it was a case of mistaken identity, which sucks. He said he threw her out into a bag, and like he remembers doing it, but he doesn't remember like the exact date or what have you. But like, oh, how much, dude, that must suck so bad. Cause like, I wouldn't, it sounds like the guy from the little bit that I learned about him, the guy is not a dumb guy, and he can definitely earn his own keep, and I doubt that he's poor, but when you lose 7,500 Bitcoin, holy crap, man. Like, I don't know about you, but that might be enough for me to consider just like saying fuck it. And like, you know what? Like you hear these stories about people like in the Great Depression, when the market fell out and stuff, and they just jumped off of buildings and stuff, like because of how much they had lost. Like, I'm not saying I would do that. I don't think I would, but the thought might come up. I don't know. Like, oh man, that must suck so much for him.
The current value of that amount of Bitcoin, by the way, is just over 300 million.
Holy mother of God. Yeah. I've seen a couple different quotes. Well, it really depends on like how much Bitcoin is worth right at the moment. But yeah, holy crap, man. Like that's a life-changing amount of money right there.
Oh yeah.
So this guy, he has been, like trying to, contact like the landfill that he knows it's in or believes it's in. And, he's been trying to, see if he can, go there and try to retrieve it. And from what I understood, like he hasn't been able to do it yet. And, like the landfill itself said that like, no, we can't do that much, excavation of a lot of these areas because it would make a huge environmental impact on the surrounding area as well. Like they don't want to, like mess with the rubbish like that, I guess. But I don't understand all that, but he's been trying to get like permission from local like council members and stuff like to be able to do this. And I don't blame him,
yeah,
I would try to do everything I could, but yeah, there's a ton of stories, and like, I'm not going to get super into the weeds with this or anything like that because like so many of the stories are so very similar. I mean, a lot of it has a lot to do with people just plain losing their passwords and stuff,
It's just like an email account. If you lose your password, but the difference is with a Bitcoin address, you can't reset the password. If you lose the password, it's gone forever. And
yeah.
The Bitcoin are not stored on that hard drive. They're stored on the network, but you can't access them without the password, and the password is on the hard drive. So if he doesn't remember the password, they're gone. If he woke up tomorrow and somehow remembered his password, he would no longer need that hard drive. But the problem is that the password or the private key is usually a randomly generated. The smallest one I've seen is 12. It's usually a 24-word passphrase. So we're talking about a 24-word long password. Not that easy to remember,
Yeah.
Now, is there a penalty if you're, let's say, a hacker and you're trying to hack a wallet and you're trying to guess the password?
No, you're welcome to try it. That's called brute force hacking. And that's where you just try all the possible combinations until you get it.
But there's no penalty. Like you don't have to wait a certain amount of time to try again.
Nope. But the way the math works out is even with the most powerful computers in the world, it would still take you thousands of years to guess the password for any particular public key. Because the way the cryptography and the math and stuff works out with a 24-word, there's too many possible combinations.
Well, of course.
It'll never happen.
Of course. I was just thinking about the group. Were you going to talk about that Asian ETA, the group that wants to retrieve Bitcoin wallets?
Well, from what I understand, there's a lot of companies out there nowadays that actually specialize in that, like trying to help people, like
right.
find their passwords and stuff like that. Like I don't know a ton about that, but I did read about that. But like one of the things I thought was kind of funny, like it was like I came across this. It's a tweet from Elon Musk that actually like he actually like I guess a friend of his like sent. I'll just read the tweet. It says a friend sent me part of a BTC a few years ago, but I don't know where it is. So like even Elon Musk himself has lost Bitcoin, like because he just like he lost track of it, I guess you could say. I don't know, like it didn't explain much. But there's been a lot of people like there's been a lot of cryptocurrency that was lost just because people died and didn't like supply anybody else with the information that they would need to get a hold of this again.
I think Elon's okay though. I think he'll live
fine.
without that partial Bitcoin.
He'll be
Oh
fine.
yeah, no, I'm sure. Yeah, it seems like he's doing pretty good.
Yeah.
But like even like I thought that was just a kind of funny little side note. You know what I mean? Like even he himself has had misplaced cryptocurrency. Hey, let me take this opportunity to thank Yak and is Ambugotten. I don't know how to pronounce that name, but you guys have been here for a while.
What's
You've been
up?
staying the test of time, and I appreciate you guys.
What's up, Yak and Ambugatan? Welcome to the show.
We just want to say thank you for being here.
Yeah, the live show. There were more people earlier, but either I bored them to death with my technical stuff, or it's late because we're in California and it's almost 10 o'clock right now. So that means that people on the East Coast, it's like 1 a.m. pretty much for them. So it's kind of hard for them to catch us live, unfortunately. But what are you gonna do?
There's a time difference. I'm in Arizona, and it's 10:50 for me right now.
Yeah. So I mean, it is getting
Which
late.
I still don't quite understand that time change there. I know there's a reason, supposedly, but
Daylight savings time is stupid, and they should just knock it off already. Please stop it with the daylight saving. It's horrible. It's just the worst. I have my little protest against daylight savings time is I don't change the clock in my car.
Yeah, I don't either. Yeah.
I'm completely powerless against it, but I refuse to change that clock because daylight savings time is completely stupid. It's, pointless. It causes harm to people. There's more accidents when the clocks are switched over because everybody's tired. It's bad. It's not good in any way. We should stop doing it already. But we should do a whole episode on that. But that's another topic for another time.
I was going to mention that. We could probably do an episode on that. Yeah.
But, all right. So I promise something a little more nefarious. So in 2017, it was discovered that there was a back door in Bitmain's Bitcoin mining hardware. Bitmain is a Chinese company that at the time made the vast majority of Bitcoin mining hardware. They were pretty much the only game in town. Most of the network was run on their machines. The market share has dropped drastically since then, mostly due to a really bad idea called Bitcoin Cash, but that's another topic that I'll maybe talk a little bit about here. But at the time, the reason they were able to corner the market is because they had like deals with people, and they had manufacturing stuff. They could produce the same thing for a fraction of what other people could produce it. So you could buy something from somebody else, but it cost a lot more. So everybody just bought their stuff from them. Basically, it takes computing power to run the network, right? It used to be in the early stages, people would just use any old computer they had lying around to run the network. But over time, people started developing hardware that was a computer, but all the computer could do would be to solve the network problem. So it could just do computing power for the network. You couldn't write documents on it. You couldn't run Windows. That was designed specifically for running the network. So one machine from Bitmain would be worth the computing power of like thousands of laptops. So it became a thing where if you wanted to contribute power to the network, you had to buy a machine specifically designed to do that. You were no longer able to use a laptop or something like that you had just sitting around. It became impractical at some point because the machines dedicated to it became too powerful to where, you would be a drop in an ocean at some point, So anyways, Bitmain back in the day, they were pretty much the only game in town. If you wanted to buy hardware for Bitcoin mining, you bought it from them. They had a virtual monopoly on the whole thing. In 2017, somebody discovered an exploit dubbed Ant Bleed. And this was introduced by Bitmain in a firmware update to their miners, which is kind of strange in and of itself, because do you think the biggest nerds on the planet, playing with their magic internet money are going to, not notice something like that? But I don't know, whatever. The firmware checked in with the central server randomly every 1 to 11 minutes and transmitted the hardware serial number, MAC address, and IP address of the miner. Bitmain could check these numbers against their sales, and they could find out specifically who the owners of each mining rig was. They could identify the owners of these rigs, completely defeating any sort of idea of being anonymous at all. There's the word I'm looking for is anonymity. I think anonymity, is that what I'm trying to say? Whatever. But what's even worse is that this backdoor allowed Bitmain to remotely shut off the mining hardware. And at this time, the number I could find was something like 70% of all the mining power was Bitmain hardware. So they could combine this backdoor with their sales logs to target specific machines or customers, right? You're like, well, why would they want to do that? They would basically be ruining their own business, right? It doesn't make any sense. This exploit was even worse, though, because of the way it worked. It also allowed for man-in-the-middle attacks and DNS hijacking. Whatever those are, we won't go into them now because a little complicated. But it's basically
man in the middle. Does that refer to like a human sandwich or something?
Sure, why not?
No, talking about.
So man in the middle would be when, let's say, if you go to log into your bank, but a hacker spoofs the web page to look like your bank's web page, and you enter your data into somebody else's. That's sort of an example of like a man. There's different versions, but that's essentially what that would be. But this particular exploit also allowed for those sorts of things. But you'd think, why would they put this in the hardware? Because it would basically be self-defeating, right? Nobody would buy their hardware anymore once it was discovered. Well, but there are some extenuating circumstances, right? So the exploit was probably from a firmware update on July 11th, 2016. Now, it wasn't discovered until 2017. So the reason why this would be useful, or why this would be so bad for them to put in there, would be that one of the reasons is that Bitmain actually ran, or runs, probably still does, a Bitcoin mining pool. Now, the idea behind a Bitcoin mining pool is that any individual, like let's say I want to mine Bitcoin at home, I can buy one machine, but that one machine is probably never going to get the Bitcoin mining reward. One of the strange things about Bitcoin is every block, all the block, like right now it's about 6 Bitcoins, those Bitcoins are not divided amongst all the people providing computing power. Instead, one individual or one machine will earn those Bitcoins. It's all or nothing. So if you only have 1 or 2 machines running, the chances of you ever getting that reward are pretty close to zero. It's like playing the lottery. So instead, if you can only afford to buy 1 or 2 machines, you'll donate that to a mining pool where everybody pools their computing power, and collectively that pool, if they get the reward, will divide it amongst all the people participating in the pool. Well, Bitmain has a mining pool, and if they were hypothetically able to shut off everybody's computing power outside of that pool, then they would get all of the rewards for mining Bitcoin. And what's even worse is, without getting into too much detail, if some entity or power was able to control all the computing power of the network, then they would, by definition, run the network, and they could basically do things like create Bitcoin out of thin air and compromise the network. So, I don't want to get into like the technical details of why that's possible, but basically, if you have a decentralized network, but all of a sudden one entity is controlling all of the computing power on that network, it's no longer decentralized. It becomes centralized at that point. So this backdoor allowed Bitmain to centralize the decentralized network. Again, why would they want to do that? If they were able to do that, even if they had their own mining pool, that would still kind of like ruin Bitcoin, right? It would crash the price and they would become worth nothing. But some people think it was done by the Chinese government because nobody in their right mind, no hardware manufacturer in their right mind would put such a thing into their hardware, into their firmware. But there's also another reason why Bitmain might have wanted to do this. And this is where we get into the more nefarious part. So if they had wanted to kill Bitcoin and introduce their own currency, it would make sense to put this exploit into the hardware. But wait, Bitmain totally did that when they backed a currency called Bitcoin Cash, which was part of a hard fork from Bitcoin in June of 2017. Now, a hard fork is basically when part of the network says, nah, we're not going to do it this way, we're going to do it a different way, and they take the network in a different direction. You now have two separate parts of the network disagreeing on which transactions are real, and that's a hard fork. So Bitmain did this with Bitcoin Cash. I mean, they did it on the down low, and this is another topic for like a whole other episode with the details of this. And some people might say, they didn't really do it. They basically bet their company on Bitcoin Cash, which they wanted to control as their own currency. And this would be the perfect way to do it, would be to put this backdoor in, use this backdoor to crash Bitcoin, to basically compromise the network and destroy Bitcoin at the right moment when they did the hard fork, making Bitcoin Cash the de facto digital currency of the world, destroying Bitcoin in the process, right? But unfortunately for them, somebody discovered the back door and was able to defeat it. So all you needed to do was go into /etc/hosts and include the line 139.59.36.141 auth.minerlink.com. You added that and it overcomes this vulnerability, supposedly. I don't know what any of that means, but that's what I found online. So it was super simple to fix the problem. So the problem was fixed, and therefore they were not able to destroy Bitcoin with this back door. Some people give them the benefit of the doubt and say, it was just a mistake, some spare code or whatever. But it's hard for me to believe that you would put such a back door into your hardware without some sort of nefarious intention of using it in the future. Whether it was the Chinese government or Bitmain or both, who knows? But there was definitely some nasty stuff going on there, right? Because they were defeated with their back door, they had to think of another way of trying to make people go from Bitcoin to Bitcoin Cash. They did this with flooding the Bitcoin network with transactions to slow it down. At the time, I think the block size was like 2 megabytes. Anything over that would overflow into the next block. So nobody knew who it was at first, but somebody eventually figured out that it was Bitmain. What you could do is put a ton of tiny little transactions to clog up the network. So if you put in a transaction that should take 10 minutes, instead it might take 10 days because the network gets really backed up. Now, since then, there have been all sorts of improvements to the network, and this is not really a problem anymore. But at the time, Bitmain was actually able to spend money to clog up the network and slow it down. And nobody's ever come out and said this is why we did it or whatever. But basically, it was because they wanted to promote their currency, which was Bitcoin Cash, at the cost of Bitcoin. They wanted people to say, well, Bitcoin is garbage. Look at the network. It doesn't work. It's all clogged up. We better start using Bitcoin Cash. But of course, it didn't work. And as a result of Bitcoin basically putting all their money into Bitcoin Cash, or Bitmain put all their eggs into Bitcoin Cash, they basically lost all their market share, and the CEO was kicked out. And now instead of having 70% of the market share, they have like less than 1% or something. I don't know the exact number. I didn't really look it up, but
it seems to me like they were trying to make a big move, but they seriously failed.
Yeah, exactly. They seriously failed, because once they found out about this backdoor, and we're not talking about a community of casual people. We're talking about a community of super nerds who are really paying attention to what's going on. Everybody's like, whoa, fuck these guys, let's get a different hardware manufacturer who's not going to do all this shenanigans. So they pretty much shot themselves in the foot, or, however you want to say it. I'm doing like a short version of this, and none of this is really proven. This is all just more or less my opinion based on what I've read. If you want to research this stuff yourself, good luck, because it is a very deep rabbit hole, a very long and winding and convoluted road. That's kind of all the stuff. There's like so much more we could do, but we're running like really, really long, and we've only really scratched the surface. I always say this a lot on this show, but it's true. Yeah. So I guess, I don't know. That's pretty much all I had for this time. Anybody else have any closing thoughts or anything?
I really would, but we're going on like what, an hour and a half?
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. We're actually I'm going to cut some of this obviously, but we're at 1 hour and 55 minutes right now.
My goodness.
But I'm probably going to cut at least half an hour of that. But I mean, yeah, we're going really long, but this is just one of those topics where I wanted to do this one for a long time now, but there's just so much to it that even just one episode is not a lot, not enough time to talk about everything. And there's tons of controversies, conspiracies, and all that kind of stuff that I haven't even gotten to, but I felt like I had to kind of explain what it was so people had some kind of context to know what Bitcoin is, and, before we got into all of the, the controversies and stuff. But yeah. All right. Well, anything else, ETA?
No. Yeah. No, I mean, we've already covered everything and plus by far, as far as what I know about this shit. I'm not going to add anything that is going to be, contributing to the conversation at this point. I can tell you that much.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you could really help us out by suggesting the show to your friends and leaving us a good review wherever you listen to podcasts.
Keep it strange.